All right. That is, we did 1,850 words. We're at 7,800. Hold on, wait. Let me take that back. 9,842 out of 50,000. Means we are 20% done. It is day 5. Because I wasn't able to read the last 2 chapters. I think that I'm going to read them tonight, and go from there. Because one of the most boring things ever is to just watch somebody type with no sound at all. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read this, and go from there. What's really cool is none of you may care, but I went to a place called Fibonacci Brewing this weekend, and this beer tastes exactly like a Bloody Mary without being a Bloody Mary. The really neat thing is that Bloody Marys make me sick, but it's one of my favorite drinks. And I'm allowed to drink it and not feel bad. Alright, so I'm going to read these chapters to you. And sorry about that loud noise. And then you guys can go off to bed. Again, I think that Alindra the Orc has the best character development so far. I noticed that I am sticking to Astrid a little bit more. I think because Alden, the captain, is still a mystery to me. So I don't know if in this draft that he'll be fully fleshed out, but we'll find out. So we're gonna go back to let's see, did we read chapter 5? We didn't. Okay, so we got chapter 3, 4, and 5 to read tonight. Chapter 3, Alindra Ursuk. That's utter bullshit. Alindra's weapon. Alindra, weapons master of the Valmont, uttered after Princess Astrid Nova had told her story. They had met back with the crew in the main ship, and Astrid had told her story in the kitchen area. It consisted of a large wooden table and benches, all connected to the floor for those moments of hard maneuvering. They'd given her a glass of protein juice, flavored and colored orange. Alden, the only one of the crew that was sitting, crossed his arms. "What do you mean you don't believe me?" Astrid frowned. "I have to say," Alden shook his head, "it sounds like a fairy tale to me." "It's not," Astrid frowned. "Why do I have a reason to lie?" "Because of this," Alindra pointed at the crystal in front of them. "If it were that important, you wouldn't be telling us about it. Or you think you could kill us and take it." "That's far-fetched," Astrid shook her head. "Not when you have a soul-bound blade," Alindra huffed. "That was my mother's blade," Astrid said. "I told you this." Alindra shifted in her seat. She was his oldest crewmate, an Orcish woman who had fought with him in every conflict since he had been in space. She wore her curly, dark hair in a messy bun. Her skin was a light green that matched her eyes. Her tusks jutted out at the bottom of her mouth, making her smile scary. "If Alindra says it to be true," Minsk the cook said, "then it's true. The woman can detect lies." "Aye," Forge, the dwarven ship mechanic, said. "She never lies." "And what do you think, Captain?" Astrid said with poison on her lips. "Do you think I'm lying?" Alden pushed back his chair and stood. He took a single step back, pulled the sword he had from its sheath, and handed it to Alindra, who nodded a single time. It was only a look that told her what she needed to do. They'd been together so long she understood that he wanted to see if she was telling the truth or not. Wait a minute, Astrid held up her hands. You're not going to just execute me. Alindra did what she had always done, and took a step forward and went for a single downward strike with all the force she could muster. It was a common move she had practiced thousands of times, and her movement was clean and without energy waste. If it connected, it would have severed the princess in half from skull to bottom. There was a violent jolt through her arms as Astrid's hands shot forward and a silver blade appeared. The two swords rang out against one another. There was a moment where both went tumbling backwards. Astrid struck the floor, her blade clattering on the ground and then disappearing. Alindra was caught by Alden. Liar, liar, Minsk shook his shaggy head. Your sword shouldn't have survived that. Astrid struggled to get up. And you shouldn't have lied to me. Alindra pulled away from Alden. You want to go again? Certainly, Astrid smiled, grabbed her sword, and rolled into a standing position. No. Alden sighed, taking the sword from Alinda and sheathing it. Not on my ship. They had won the game that the princess had been trying to play, and though they had no clue how she had gotten on the ship, nor if that man Alden killed was really who he said she was, the only thing that had piqued their interest was the name Void Cutter. From what they had gathered from the Intergalactic Informational Database, it was the flagship of Lady Orcam Vortrox, the first of the Galactic Coalition. That meant that the government was involved. Captain says no fighting on this ship, Alindra sneered. So, for now, we'll call it peace. To hell with all of you. Astrid threw her hands in the air and the sword disappeared. So we're going to sit back down here and you're going to have to tell us everything, Alindra said, and then we'll decide what to do. We're going to decide if we're going to space you. Forge sighed and slipped onto the bench. Because if you're part of the GC, then you're not worth the trouble, Minsk sighed, and took off his cook's hat and sat down as well. Alden shook his head. Maybe you're too much trouble. Space me if you want, Astra sat down looking up at Alden, but make sure that the shard doesn't get in the hands of Orcam. Just talk, Alden said as he turned and walked to the self-stabilizing cabinets on the walls. He opened them, grabbed a few more cups, and poured everyone the orange color and flavored protein drinks. Alindra didn't like how easy he was with this woman. She had known that human men were always enamored by those from different species easily, but there was more to it. His eyes seemed locked onto the shard more than the woman in front of him. First, tell us about the shard, Alindra pointed with her cup. What is it? From my research, Astrid shook her head. It's some kind of information crystal. What kind of information? Alindra asked. I don't know, she replied. You can't access it with any computer that I know. Then we'll find someone who knows of a computer, Alindra said, and see if we can crack it. Is it dangerous? Minsk asked. It's Minsk. Asked. Of course it's dangerous, Forge sighed. Why the hell would we be finding it? We're cursed. Do you know where we can look? Alden asked. Any clues whatsoever? From what I've read, Astrid took the cup from both hands and stared at the shard. There's supposed to be something called the Throne of the Universe, and someone is to take it there, use it, and the ultimate secrets of power will be unlocked. Still sounds like a fairy tale, Alindra shook her head. Though the woman wasn't lying about what she thought the shard was used for, she wasn't sure that following the idea of prophecies was a good thing. Her people had followed prophecies until they destroyed themselves, and she wasn't ready for that again. I vote we take it to the librarian, Alindra said. Everyone but Astrid agreed. They held up their drinks as they always did when they agreed on something and downed the drink. Alden took up the cups and stuck them inside the stabilized washing device. He picked up the spear that was leaning against the wall and stepped out of the room. Minsk uttered something about inventory and went to the back rooms of the kitchen where, Alindra knew, he would get high on velo weed and create different recipes that they would be subjected to for the next few weeks. Forge sighed and patted Astrid's hand. We're not spacing you, it seems. He chuckled and wandered off to tinker with the inner workings of the ship. Alindra crossed her hands and laid them on her stomach as she leaned back in her chair. Danger was something she was left to assess, and though Forge had promised Astrid that she was safe, the woman wasn't safe just yet. "What are you planning to do?" Astrid said. "Interrogate me?" "Yes," Alindra said, "but know that I don't care about your past." "Why not?" Astrid asked. "If I'm a princess, then you have a good bounty on your hands." "You're not a princess anymore." Alindra shook her head. She reached into her brown vest and pulled out a small data slate, activating the latest news that revealed both Astrid's parents were killed in the massive attack. The culprit was one Orcam Vortrox on behalf of the Galactic Coalition Council. The reason was that there had been talks of rebellion. As the report went on, there had been someone in the lower courts that had reported it, and they were being put in place of power. A bounty for the death of Astrid, the ex-princess, was as highest of 16 million credits dead and 40 million credits and a planet alive. "So technically you're a queen," Alindra turned off the hologram, "but a queen of nothing." "I was never a princess of anything but combat training and scholars," she sighed. "I don't care." Alindra slid the data slate back into her vest. "All I care about is this crew." "Then what do you want from me?" Astrid asked. "For you to tell me if you intend to do this crew harm," Alindra said. "No," Astrid said. It was the truth. "Do you intend to report this crew to the captain, or the captain to the Galactic Coalition?" "No." Truth. "Do you believe that this shard is truly an artifact of power?" "I don't know." Truth. "If I give you a room and allow you to free roam on this ship," Alindra leaned forward, "will you try to kill any of us?" "I've already said no." Truth. "Just checking," Alindra said. "Do you enjoy protein paste?" "Sure," Astrid nodded. "Lie." "That's all we have," Alindra smiled. "Just get a bowl and a spoon anytime you're hungry and access that protein machine over there. We've got a ton of it, so don't be shy." With that, Alindra stood from the table, walked down the hall, and stopped at the door that had a single red mark on the dark wooden surface. Astrid, realizing she should, soon followed and stood in front of the door with her. "Across the hall is my room if you want to try to kill someone," Alindra said. "Why is there a red mark on this door?" Astrid asked. "Last crewman died," Alindra said. "Bad luck." She left the woman there and went up to the control room. Then there's a pause. "You didn't," Alden said, wiping a tear from his eye after a long belly laugh. "I did," Alindra nodded. "Said we had a crewman die and everything." "And you told her that we only had protein paste to eat?" he asked. "Yep," Alindra nodded. She said she could have all she wanted." "When was the last time it was tested?" Alden smiled. 3 years ago." They both shared a laugh, and she leaned into him. He was her only friend in the world, and though they had found each other through violence and ruin, it felt good to laugh with him. He'd see something other than his dour face all the time. "You think she's telling the truth about the shard?" Alinda asked. "I think she's running from something," Alden sighed, "and the GC isn't something I don't know if we can hide from for long." "But she's got your attention, doesn't she?" Alindra looked into the void of space before them. "That she does," he said. "There's something about her that tells me that we don't have much of a choice." "Fated, then," she said as she held out her hand. He took her hand as his, and they made a fist together. "Fated," he replied. They looked into one another's eyes, knowing that whatever they were about to do, it wasn't going to end well. It wasn't going to end well. All right. Chapter 4. It had been 2 days since she had been picked up. She refused to use the word rescued by the crew of the Valmont, and all of them she had decided needed some sort of therapy. The orcish woman Alindra was the worst of them, and she couldn't help but want to pick a fight with her every chance they had. Right then she was using an encoded data slate that she had been assured was safe. She spent most of her time following the news of the death of her parents at the hands of the Galactic Coalition. What she had told the crew was mostly true, that her parents and her meant nothing to one another. But that wasn't the issue. What bothered her was that she knew why they had been attacked. The stellar shard had been found, and she had to run with it immediately by the orders of her father. He died, she imagined, refusing to say where she had gone. He knew, like she did, that the fate of the universe was the most important thing over love, family, and personal needs. She had read old books that had been kept over centuries containing the writings of the guardians of the stellar shard, and how they knew that someday, when space travel was possible, that the risk would increase. And so, it had. Her people had fought more wars across the universe on false pretensions. The real reason was that the shard had been spotted, or some reading suggested that it might have been there, and when it came time to repay those debts, they had defended their planet and their home for a millennium, until no one was left but them. They had, or so they thought, darkened the system of life enough that they would never be touched again. Then the Galactic Republic came with its bulky warships and overwhelming firepower. There would have been no chance to go to war with them, so they accepted the terms. All the books were burned, those who knew about the shards were sacrificed for the good, and everyone moved on. Astrid wasn't killed, but it had been announced so. None of that mattered now. She was the only person in the entire universe who knew about the shard enough to use it. Whatever Lady Orcam thought she knew, it wasn't enough. But with her planet compromised, there was no way she could go back home and sequester herself willingly. Not after she had been out just this much. Even being trapped in space with a bunch of hostile strangers, it had been better being alone than being alone fighting robots all day long. The door to her bedroom hissed open. She rolled off her bed quickly and landed on her feet, ready to strike. Standing in front of her was Alden, the overly large man with dark skin and white and black dreads. Over his shoulder he had the same age spear made of some bone, metal, and wood. "So Alindra says that you're good in a fight," Alden said. "Well," Alindra shrugged, "theoretically. To be on the Valmont, you have to participate," Alden sighed. "Can you cook, repair, or build things?" "Not at all," Astrid replied. "Then you're going to have to fight with us," he said, "when the time comes." "Fight with you?" She followed him out the door and down the hall toward the kitchen area. "What is it that your crew does for a living?" She stopped short at the door to see that the table was covered in firearms, melee weapons, and toolkits. There was a deck designed for hacking with a set of different keyboards laid out. A little of everything. Alden picked up and put down his weapons in turn. Hold on just a second. Behind him, Minsk was cooking something. There was a pile of vegetables and meat remains that he had slid into a recycling compactor that she had read about in her data slates. Usually the crew would eat decently for as long as they could, but after a while they would start eating protein paste, processed from the leftovers. "You have real food?" Astrid said. "That's not important right now," Alden said. "Right now we're going onto an abandoned ship." "And why would I need to fight?" she asked. "Because we're not the only ones that bought the information," Alindra replied, stepping into the room. And around her, Minsk handed her a plate of gleaming steak and crunchy leafy greens. She looked at Astrid and smiled bigger than normal, which to her looked like she was growling. Astrid walked over to Minsk and held out her hands. The cook shrugged at her apologetically and handed her a plate of the same. Because the table was covered with instruments of death, everyone ate standing around the table. "So we're scavenging today?" she asked. "Today we're scavenging?" Forge asked, stepping into the room. His hands and face were covered in oil, and he smelled like heated plastic. "That we are," Alden replied, in between huge bites. "Then we're going to sell what we found on extortion, meet up with the librarian, and then go from there." "You're still set on finding out what this thing she has is," Alindra frowned. "That I am," Alden said. "If it is what she says it is, then we have to." "This could ruin us," Alindra said. "She's dangerous." Astrid could feel the tension rising in the room. Alindra could sense something from Astrid and the shard, and that was enough to set her on edge. That's what Astrid liked about her. She wasn't coy, but straightforward. Alden, on the other hand, seemed to accept the shard as something he had to deal with. "I'm in to find it out," Forge said. "Me too," Minsk replied as he continued to cook. "I didn't say I wasn't," Alindra said. "I'm just saying that nothing's going to be the same." "Since the Veritas," Alden sighed, "nothing's been the same." It grew quiet, and each of the members put their hands over their hearts and uttered the name that Astrid couldn't make out. I just can't leave, Astrid said. The universe. I can just leave, Astrid said. The universe is vast. I am one person. The verse ain't that vast, Alinder said. Pretty small. Not a lot of planets to live on, Alden nodded. That is worth a shit. I just need to live until I find another keeper, Astrid said. Nah, Ford said. You gotta live at some point, or it wasn't worth it. If the fate of the universe is in balance, Astrid said, I can sacrifice myself. Very noble, Alinder said. But stupid. Alden put down his plate and wiped his mouth. Stupid, Astrid frowned. How is that stupid? Because you don't know what you're sacrificing it for, Alden replied. The universe, she replied. The verse ain't nothing worth saving, Alinder replied. The best thing to do, Ford smiled and walked over, taking her hand, is to go out here and see if it's worth saving. Alindra's just a mean old bitch. Everyone but Alindra laughed, and though she didn't laugh, she leaned into Alden's chest as he hugged her. After a few minutes, the normally soft yellow lights on the ceiling and along the walkways of the ship shifted to a deep red. Remember when I said you might have to fight? Alden asked. Yes. Astrid could feel a cold chill run down her spine. Well, this is it, he said. Follow us. With that, he shoved the laser pistol into his belt and sheathed the sword that should have been broken on her blade but didn't. Alinder grabbed a multitude of weapons that she holstered on different parts of her body. Then she pointed to the hacking deck with the keyboards. Bring the deck along with blue and red, she replied. Astrid picked up the black canvas backpack, slipped the deck inside, and shoved the blue and red keyboards on either side. She paused at the table, grabbed a small laser pistol, and followed them down the hall. The loading and unloading bay were a large empty area. Above them was a small ship that she had ridden in on. There were empty crates pushed to the sides of the walls, as well as containers full of what she considered daily supplies strapped and labeled to the farthest wall. Beside the large doors, there was a smaller door with a set of white and orange spacesuits. You're not serious, she said. I've never been in space. You've never been in... I've never been in space. That doesn't sound good. Okay. You've never been inside of a spaceship either, Alden said, stripping down into his underclothes. Alinder was doing the same. Both their bodies were hardened with muscles and scars, more than she had imagined anyone should ever have. Some of the wounds looked a little fresh, and she could see bruises still fading around Alden's chest. Over the scars and muscles were matching tattoos that started from their neck and ran to the length of their bodies, spreading out across their arms. Astrid pulled off her clothes and quickly slipped into one of the suits, then followed instructions on how to ensure everything was locked tight. The communications were tested, and she picked back up the canvas bag and stepped into the small, cramped airlock. What's with the tattoos? Astrid asked finally. Those are the Valmont. Mont? I don't know why I keep saying Valmont. Are part of the same tribe, Alden said. We all have the same tattoos. What if someone wants to leave? Astrid asked. They can leave, Alden nodded, but they're still one of ours. Alinder nodded as they both turned and looked at the door. There was a small window looking out into the void of space. Slowly she could see a massive freighter come into view from the ship's exterior lights. Docking in 13 seconds, a new voice said. Wait, Astrid said. Who is that? A ghost, Alinder replied. The ship docked and the lights went from red to blue. For the first time in her entire life, Astrid Nova stepped onto another ship to scavenge from the dead. Alright, we're almost caught up. We'll read this last chapter, and then I will bid all of you good night. Chapter 5. The Salvage of the Freeman. Of course, there had been numerous holovids, data, and other forms of information talking about those who had spent their time finding space wrecks in hopes of finding something of value. All of them, most of the time, depicted the crew as cruel, evil, and callous to the dead. As the doors hissed open, revealing a long hall that was void of light and sound, Astrid wondered if there was something she could be doing in respect of the dead. Both Alinder and Alden walked forward, the helmet lights flickering to life, illuminating their way. What do you mean, Astrid asked, about that voice being a ghost? This is a medical B-class freighter, Alden said as they continued down the hall. We're looking for containers that have GC symboled. All of those will have medical supplies that we can use or maybe sell if we needed. Understood, sir, Linder said. As they moved down the corridor, they came to the door that was sealed shut. From where Astrid could see, it was locked by pneumatic means activated by a long dead power grid. Though she wasn't too sure beyond that, she figured that they weren't going any further. Hey, Winston, Alindra said into the comms. Yes, the strange voice replied. Activate protocol jumpstart, she said. There was a single chirp of recognition. Winston wasn't a name or a person that she had met yet, and though the ship, according to what she had looked up on the Intergalactic Information Network, was a larger mid-sized ship, she had expected to see everyone at least once by then. Their avoidance of the subject made her even more curious. 2 minutes later, dull blue running lights flickered on. Some of them, damaged by cold or in whatever the fate of the ship, stayed dark. The door's controlled panel flickered to life, requesting a facial scan. Alindra turned and held out her hand. The deck and blue keyboard, please, she commanded. Astrid did as she was told and handed her the 2 parts. She watched as Alden popped the side cover off the scanner and slid a small cable that connected to the deck. He held the square box while Alindra flipped up the screen, connected to the keyboard, and started typing in a string of commands with a single finger. She would pause, look at the data slate, and continue to type in a little more. We need a deck runner, Alden said after a few minutes, or we're never going to get anywhere. I can't type this code as well as read it, Alindra growled. I could probably do it, Astrid said. I had a lot of time to learn my way of copying data. Then get up here and do it, Alindra said. I'm a weapons specialist, not a decker. The orc chucked the data slate at her. In the loss of gravity, it spun slowly toward her, but she still found it difficult. She still found difficulty in catching it. After she had switched the woman places, she positioned the data slate at eye level and then started copying the code into the green and black screen. Though she had only trained in copying down material and not fully understanding it, she could, after a few seconds, pick up on the code. Her fingers moved faster, and before she knew it, the door slid open. Impressive, Alden said. And you said you've never done that before? Not that, Astrid said, taking the equipment back. Not even close. Mr. Collini replied. Or she knew how to do it all along, Alindra said and stepped past her. She followed them into a large receiving bay. Floating in the space were containers, beds, data slates, and tools of all different kinds. To her relief, she couldn't see any bodies. Though she had read about what space could do to someone, she had never wanted to see it. It looks like this place was evacuated, Alden said, looking around. Winston, Alindra said, diagnostics of the ship. Engines disabled, gravity disabled, life supports including heat and oxygen at minimal, life form scan continuing, the voice said. There's no taking this thing. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. There's no taking this thing with us to the salvage yards, Alindra sighed. We could make big money off that. Not going to risk it, Alden said. We'd get a target on our back. Winston could run it, she said. We'd move him over. I could run this, Winston replied, if it were operational. It isn't, Alden shook his head, so we're not. There was no more discussion. Instead, Alden announced that he was going toward the front of the ship and that Alindra and Astrid should go into the storage compartments. He mentioned that they should be looking for closed containers. There shouldn't be any trinkets or other items that were useless. If there are dead here, he said as he slipped into the darkness, pay them respects they deserve. Get their identification so we can alert the families. Astrid followed the tall woman through the floating debris. I figured you have some questions, Alindra said as she picked a large crate that looked sealed. There was a green rune on it with what looked like a place to slide a card across. She floated it back to Astrid with the cable attached. Let it float behind you, she said. We'll add more as we go. Who the hell is Winston? Astrid asked. Hello, Astrid Nova, guest of the Valmont. Security clearance 0. Danger level is 7 out of 10, it said. I am Winston, the artificial intelligence of the ship. A 7 out of 10? Alindra scoffed. That's too high, Winston. No, it isn't, Winston replied. I am not incorrect in my calculations. I think you are this time, partner. Alindra stopped in front of another door that had been in the process of opening. Do I need to get that? Astrid started to pull. off the backpack, but stopped as Alinder gripped the edge of the door with both hands and pulled it open, grunting the whole time. I was once a person, Winston said as they continued down the hall, but I don't know what happened. You won't know what happened. Alinder moved down the narrow hall because we had you made not to remember. I cannot feel pain or regret, Winston said. You definitely would, Alinder replied. So, Winston was a crewmate once? Astrid asked. The best mate we had, Alinder said. Though she may have been searching for it, she thought that she could hear a pain in the woman's voice. There was no need to push anymore, especially since they were alone on a derelict ship where an accident could happen at any moment. Instead, Astrid walked down the hall, thinking about the code she had just copied and how easy it was to read. She liked the fact that she could anticipate what was going to be typed next, and soon found herself way ahead of the code written on the screen. To her, it was like seeing a child writing in a very short story, but in clip formatting that she had to rewrite and make it sound like a real story. She liked how it felt. And there was a calm about her when she was staring at the screen, the green and black screen. A 7, Alinder replied after a while. Why in all the versus hells is she... Yeah, it is. Fuck you, Grammarly. Is she a 7? Because she is a Yvrilian that is roughly 2,000 years old, bonded to a blade that can be dismissed or summoned at any time. Through the initial readings and blood samples, she is in good health and her intelligence above average. Excuse me? Astrid interrupted. Blood samples? Yes, Alinder said. You wouldn't have felt it. Winston? Astrid said. Yes. You do not have my permission to sample any more of my bodily fluids or conduct invasive scans until you have my permission. Understood, Winston chirped in. Be aware that I will continue to monitor your health levels to accommodate and treat any sustained injuries throughout combat or Minsk's. There we go. And his poor cooking. I heard that, Minsk's voice cut in. Don't forget we can all hear you. There was a long silence as they gathered the containers that were sealed. They had the 2 blocky letters of GC painted on them. Astrid threaded them through the cable, and before long she had 6 containers of different sizes. Alinder stopped at the start of a hall and held up her hand. Body, she said. Alinder looked over her shoulder to see that there was a figure dressed in solid black suit floating against the ceiling. Their arms were hanging toward the ground, their legs were missing completely. The face was pale and sunken in, like one of those mummies she had seen in the old holovids designed to scare people. She followed close behind Alinder until she made it to the body. The hall was full of containers opened, the contents either frozen or long gone. There were plastic wrappers that had been torn open. Some of them had held bandages and syringes. Hello there, Alinder said quietly. My people believe that the dead soul doesn't leave until you're found and seen. Astrid watched as Alinder found an identification bracelet as well as a name tag. She pocketed them, and then she lowered the body to the ground. There she crossed the arms and mumbled something Astrid couldn't hear. You are seen, friend, in the void, she said. You are found. You can go now. I'll tell your loved ones that you have passed. They stood there for a while in silence while Alindra uttered something in what Astrid assumed was Orcish. Then she stood, turned, and pointed back the way they had came. There was another hall behind the body, but Astrid didn't argue. She backed up with their containers in tow. The depiction of the scavengers she had known was completely wrong. Though she wasn't part of the crew and she knew that maybe next time they scavenged it wouldn't be the same, but for the moment she didn't feel bad. Someone who was lost had been found. Once back on the ship, with gravity in place, Alden laid out the 6 containers he found besides those that Astrid had come across. All the crew had assembled onto the docking bay and they each had a silver coin in their hands. Minsk walked around handing out metal cups. Astrid took one and an extra coin that Alden handed her. They dropped the coins into the cup, and then Minsk poured a dark drink that foamed. Let's just get rid of the... We thank those that have left their things for us to find, Alden said. Everyone repeated, holding their mugs into the air. Then they drank them down. Astrid, not knowing what to do with the coin, swallowed it down with her drink. When she lowered her cup, she found that everyone else had done the same. Now, Forge clapped his hands, let's get this deck fired up and crack these boxes to see what we've got. Alright. So, that is another day down. There was a lot of reading. I didn't mean to drink a lot of my Bloody Mary beer, but it looks like I did. Again, it's a good drink. I will be back here tomorrow to do the same thing that I did today. I don't know. I have an idea, but I don't know where this is going. I don't know who I'll do next. I feel like you know how in stories for the reader to learn and without too much exposition and bore them with like lore and stuff, the reader to learn what's going on. Usually you have a character that's kind of new to the situation and they're like learning with the reader. I'm pretty sure that Astrid is going to be our main source. I really like all of the characters and I want to bounce around to them. My favorite character that I think is gonna like hit home with me isn't actually here yet. So I'm thinking about jumping over to them. They're not on the ship, the Valmont. That's what it's called. They're not there. They're somewhere else. But it ties in. I really like this idea of making her a decker, which is just a hacker, but instead of it being called a computer, it's just called a deck. I've always had this like fascination. I made a character once in a D&D campaign where it was a guy that had like a computer in his backpack, but instead of different swords at his hip, he had like different keyboards for different things. So that's where that's coming from. I don't know if I'm going to let Astrid become that or if they're going to hire one. I don't know where that's going there, but we'll figure it out together. But that's where we are. You know, we're 20% in, and it feels. I thought it would be a little harder. You know, but it's not. Of course, there's some inconsistencies. Of course, there's some things that are a little messed up. But that's what happens with first drafts. This is the raw first draft. This is something that I don't like to show people. I'm not very what is it called? I'm not very superstitious about things, but one of the things that I found about myself, and this is just like maybe like a curse or whatever. And, you know, it's self-made. You know, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when I send someone something that isn't finished, I never finish it, right? So my best friend Chad, I send him work that's in the process sometimes, and he'll read it and he'll be like, "That's great," and that, you know, it's his support's great and it's cool, but at the same time, I know that if I do that, I'm cursing myself, and I'm not gonna finish it, right? So I'm really apprehensive about sharing this as I go because you're watching my mistakes all along the way, right? You're seeing my typos, you're seeing everything. But I believe that it's important to show you that like everybody has them, right? Everybody's got them, and it's just not a good time sometimes, right? Writing is rough. It's a learning experience. But I really, those of you that watch this, if you use it to go to sleep, I try to stay as calm as possible. I try to keep the noise down. I do appreciate you watching. We have, let's see, how many days are in November? 30. So we have 25 more days to get through, and I am absolutely worried that we're not going to make it. Well, let's hope we do. Let's hope you stick around. Until tomorrow night, you guys have a good one. See you around.